Q Review Print Speaking to the Blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @CuneReview, that is @CuandReview. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@cunereview.com. That is INFORMATION or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
This is from the Herald Scotland of Wednesday the 29th of January 2025 from the Voices section. Caring for the elderly is the responsibility of everyone. This article is by Carlos Alba. Asked to name the most pressing challenges facing governments north and south of the border, most people would point to low economic growth, burgeoning taxation, illegal immigration, and perhaps falling education standards. Few would mention bed blocking. Many people might even be unaware what the term means, and yet it is the most visible symptom of what should be the number one priority for any decent society, ensuring that its most elderly and vulnerable members are properly cared for. Bed blocking is a technical term assigned by health service managers for when generally older hospital inpatients no longer require medical treatment, but have no care arrangements in place for them when they are discharged. In most cases, they will live alone, have few or no friends or relatives to look after them, and lack the financial means to pay for private care. Ensuring that such people are not left to their own devices to rot and possibly die at home should be a minimum requirement of any government, and yet it appears to be one of the most intractable problems facing politicians. In simple terms, it arises because the National Health Service provides medical treatment, while personal care services are provided by local authorities. Two monolithic public bureaucracies who seem unable or unwilling to cooperate effectively. The Scottish Government's most recent attempt to ensure that people can pass safely and seamlessly from one to the other was the National Care Service. Launched amid a fanfare of publicity in 2021, it was described by the then First Minister Nicola Sturgeon as the most ambitious reform since devolution. So ambitious, in fact, that last week its central plank, the establishment of a centralised body to oversee social care, was scrapped, effectively killing the policy. While ministers have pledged to press ahead with the delivery of a service in one form or another, it has been clear for some time that the idea was a dead duck, after councils and trade unions withdrew support and health boards and care providers expressed doubts that a viable service could be delivered. It is now more than 20 years since the Labour First Minister Henry McLeish introduced free personal care, FPC, for the elderly in Scotland. At the time, it was presented as a panacea and a triumph for devolution, but, as we all know now, it was not what it seemed. For starters, it only applies to care provided for people in their homes. Care and nursing homes were never included in the policy, leaving many people of moderate means facing hefty bills and potential financial ruin. The loss of attendance allowance for those in care homes who are in receipt of FPC further compounds their financial difficulties and means testing is complicated and stressful. There is also the misnomer that it is free. While the elderly don't directly pay for personal care services, they are ultimately funded by general taxation, placing a strain on public finances. The management of social care delivery by councils, while intended to foster local decision-making, has created inconsistencies across the country. This postcode lottery highlights a persistent failure to establish a truly equitable system, undermining the idea of a national standard of care. The introduction of self-directed support, SDS, was meant to empower individuals by giving them control over their care budget, but most users continue to allow local authorities to manage their care. The biggest drawback to the current system, however, is that it is reactive and focuses entirely on addressing immediate rather than future needs. The challenge of an aging population with increasingly complex care needs and a shrinking workforce requires a proactive approach, and the system lacks any forward thinking or planning to deal with the future needs of an elderly population. Addressing such shortcomings should be something everyone is invested in. It's a complex and continuing problem that requires collective effort, determination, and goodwill. Instead, all of those involved, the NHS, local authorities, and trade unions, seem more focused on protecting their own vested interests and power bases, leaving it to politicians to carry the can when things inevitably go wrong. Meanwhile, the business of running care homes is left to speculators and investors in complicated corporate structures, many of which have holdings in tax havens, making it difficult to ascertain precisely how much of UK pensioners' and taxpayers' money they are using to line their pockets. There is also a little discussed cultural hurdle that prevents elderly people being treated with proper care and dignity. Family units in this country are more atomized than they were in the past. Until the 1960s, it was the job of women to look after their children and grandchildren until they, in turn, were looked after by younger family members when they grew old. This required different generations to live, if not under the same roof, at least in the same neighborhood. In some other countries, these extended kinship networks remain the norm, and they regard elderly care as a family rather than a social responsibility. In Spain, for example, where my father was born, it is not uncommon for young people to continue living with their parents until they marry, sometimes until they are in their 30s, and for elderly parents to live with their children until they die. Such a profound cultural shift is unlikely to happen here, where we value personal freedoms more highly than extended family ties, and so caring for the elderly will doubtless remain predominantly a political challenge. But it shouldn't. The focus on a narrow definition of personal care, geographic disparities, strained budgets, and the undervaluing of unpaid carers, and a lack of forward-thinking policies, all point to a need for comprehensive reform. An integrated approach is required to address all aspects of care, from preventing illness and promoting independence to providing financial support, while also valuing the role of unpaid carers. Only then can we ensure that the social care system meets the needs of all elderly people in Scotland, now and in the future. That article was by Carlos Alba. This is from the Herald Scotland of Wednesday the 29th of January 2025 from the business section. Scottish soft drink giant puts on a sparkling show. This article is by Scott Wright. Shares in iron brew maker AG Bar sparkled after the soft drinks giant beat city expectations of margin growth and hailed a standout performance by its Rubicon brand. Bar saw its stock surge by nearly 7% as Chief Executive Ewan Sutherland declared the Cumbernauld-based company was on track to deliver another year of strong top-line growth, margin improvement and cash generation. The long-established business, which also owns energy drink Boost, cocktail ingredients brand Funkin, and Moma oat milk, reported that it expects to generate revenue of around £420 million for the year ended January 25th, signalling year-on-year growth of about 5%. Bar noted that its full-year adjusted operating margin is expected to show strong improvement to around 13.5%, up from 12.3% and ahead of expectations, and declared that this will help drive double-digit percentage profit growth, and it expects to record further margin improvement in its new financial year. Analysts expect Bar to report an adjusted pre-tax profit of £57.4 million for 2024-25, rising to £65 million in 25-26, when it expects further improvement in adjusted operating margin to 14.5%. The last decade has thrown a lot at AG Bar in the form of new regulations on sugar content, COVID-19, carbon dioxide shortages, and input cost inflation. And they are all before the usual issues of competition and changing trends in consumers' tastes. But the Scottish firm's latest trading update suggests it is coping admirably, said Russ Mould, Investment Director at AJ Bell. Sales are up, profit margins are expanding faster than analysts had expected, and cash flow remains strong, even as AG Bar continues to invest in capacity and its supply chains. The company now looks poised to make record profits in the year to January 2025 and follow up with a further advance in 2026, which may help to explain why the shares are trading close to 5-year highs. Bar said all three of its core soft drinks brands, Iron Brew, Rubicon and Boost, performed strongly, with Rubicon held out as the standout performer, with another year of double-digit percentage revenue growth. Iron Brew is now one of the top 5 carbonates in the UK following a year of strong revenue growth, the firm added. The financial period saw the firm make changes to its convenience channel route to market and integrate Boost into its soft drinks business. The projects are expected to yield significant commercial and operational synergies, although they will give rise to a one-off cost of around £5 million in the 2024-25 financial year, which will be treated as an adjusting item. Bar said the period had seen it continue its multi-year supply chain investment programme with an overall capital spend of £19 million. The investment included a new small format PET line and an upgraded large format PET line in Cumbernauld, which provided increased capacity and capability. The firm reported that it was highly cash generative and ended the year with more than £60 million of cash, compared with £53.6 million at the end of the previous accounting period. Mr. Sutherland said, AG Bar is in line to deliver another year of strong top-line growth, margin improvement and cash generation. These headline metrics highlight excellent progress towards our long-term financial goals. We have sustained brand momentum despite the well-trailed wider market pressures and continue to make good progress towards our margin target. We are committed to consistent long-term revenue growth and have confidence in further margin improvement as per our previous guidance. Our expectations for 25-26 are unchanged and in line with market expectations. BAR will report its full-year results for 24-25 on March the 25th. Shares closed the day up 6.69%, or 39 pence at 622 pence. That article was by Scott Wright.
From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 30th of January, from the news section. Glasgow to host event celebrating contribution of Irish women. Article by Mark McDougall. An event celebrating the contributions of Irish women to Glasgow is to be held at the City Chambers on Friday night. The event is held on the eve of St Brigid's Day, which is celebrated across the world by highlighting the creativity and contribution of women. It is particularly big in Ireland and also represents the beginning of spring. The event forms a part of Glasgow's 850th anniversary celebrations and is being hosted by the City Council, as well as the Consulate General of Ireland and Donegal Country Council. A panel will look at archives and heritage material and the stories contained within, as well as projects using visual arts to tell the stories of women from Irish diaspora. A particular focus will be put on women from Donegal, with the northwest county having a long and historic connection with the city of Glasgow over hundreds of years. The panel will include Dr. Naima Brennan and Caroline Carr from the Culture Division of Donegal County Council, as well as Dr. Aidan O'Brien from Glasgow Life, Dr. Rachel Flynn from the University of West of Scotland, and Katrina McBride from Glasgow's School of Art. A statement on Ireland.ie's website says, Glasgow City Council presents an evening celebrating the Glaswegian women with Irish connections and the contributions they have made to the city. As Glasgow marks its 850th anniversary, Glasgow City Council will look at the extraordinary lives led by a woman of Irish descent in Glasgow, as well as examine how we commemorate our shared heritage through archives, art and culture. There will be a panel of historians exploring lives and experiences with a particular focus on the experiences of women from Donegal. In Ireland, 1st of February marks the beginning of spring in celebration of St Brigid's Day. Around the world, the day is celebrated by highlighting creativity and contributions of women. Guests are asked to arrive from 6 p.m. and the event will formally begin at 6:30 p.m. sharp. And that article was written by Mark McDougall and read by me, Arden. From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 30th of January, from the news section. CHAS appeal as hospice gardens hit by £60,000 worth of damage in storm. Article by Mark McDougall. The gardens of Children's Hospice Robin House has suffered £60,000 worth of damages during Storm Eowyn. The hospice in Balloch is one of the two serving Scotland and run by the Children's Hospice Across Scotland CHS charity. The main building managed to avoid any damage, but it was noticeable that the garden suffered serious damage and will take months to recover and repair. Gale force blasts uprooted mature trees, destroyed fences, damaged drainage and wrecked the garden's polytunnel cover and frame beyond rescue. The maintenance team, led by Hugh Munday, estimated the cost will be £60,000 and are asking for donations to cover replanting and repairs. He said, "There's been 2 big storms before Storm Eowyn, but this was by far the worst damage I've seen to the garden. It's going to cost thousands to reinstate." CHAS gardener Maggie Brown added, "Our garden is a special place here at Robin House. It's an active garden for the children and young people to enjoy, get close to nature and experience messy play, which is often something that's not possible in the same way for them at home. It's also a place that holds precious memories for families and offers a quiet sanctuary for parents, siblings and loved ones." CHAS Medical Director Annabel Howell said, "It's so sad to see the damage at the garden at Robin House. While we will work hard to repair and replant, we know there will be a knock-on impact for the families we support as this work is done. Each week in Scotland, 3 children die from incurable conditions, and many children in incurable conditions enjoy respite at the end of their life care with CHAS in the Robin House. Our gardens are an essential part of their care and well-being, and that of their families. No one should have to face the death of a child alone. All fundraising support makes a huge difference as we manage the lasting impact of Storm Eowyn, We are thankful for the support people can give. And that article was written by Mark McDougall and read by me, Aaron.
From the Herald Scotland, Wednesday the 29th of January 2025, from the sports section. Aston Villa 4, Celtic 2. Celtic's crazy train rolls on despite defeat. Report by Graham McGarry. As Celtic walked out into a crackling Villa Park for their final league phase match in this season's Champions League, the home fans unveiled a massive tifo display from the top of the famous Holt End, featuring one of Birmingham's favourite sons, Ozzy Osbourne. As it transpired, the start to the match couldn't have been more horrifying for those of a Celtic persuasion, supposing the self-styled Prince of Darkness himself had marched into the centre circle and bitten the head off a bat. There was a real-life Prince in attendance too, with the visiting supporters providing one of the lighter moments of the night as they welcomed Villa fan Prince William into the stadium by singing that they were walking in a Harry Wonderland. But the first 5 minutes were no laughing matter. A Morgan Rogers double within that frantic opening rocked the Scottish champions to their core, and it looked for all the world in those frothy exchanges as though another bruising battering, a la Borussia Dortmund, was on the cards for Brendan Rodgers and his men. This has been a campaign in which Celtic have had some harsh lections dished out to them, and, despite ultimately falling to defeat here in the end, they seem to have heeded many of them throughout their impressive run that led to the securing of a knockout tie for the first time in 12 years. They showed here that while they still have a lot to learn at this level, the one thing they have taken on board is the value of hanging in there. There were last-gasp deflections off the post, a goal-line clearance from Alistair Johnson. There was grit. Then, Matty Cash went down injured for the host, prompting a spell of treatment that was to prove fateful for a couple of reasons. Firstly, Rodgers summoned his team to the sidelines for a war council, and suddenly, his men finally looked up for the battle. They were snapping into tackles instead of standing back, and admiring the impressive movement and incisive passing of their opponents. Cash had to be withdrawn, and in his place came John McGinn to a rapturous welcome from the home fans. The Scotland hero had no doubt dreamed as a lad of contributing to a Celtic goal in the Champions League, but probably not while wearing opposition colours. Celtic conjured up their first real move of quality, as Rio Hatate's clever pass got Greg Taylor in on the left, and, as McGinn slid back in an attempt to cut out his cross, he succeeded only in laying it on a plate for Ida to help the ball into the net. You know what they say, you wait 15 games for a goal and then 2 come along at once. The big Irishman hadn't scored in an age, but he didn't have to choose his stage to break the lone drought. And sensationally, less than 2 minutes later, he had another to send Celtic supporters wedged into the corner of the Doug Ellis stand into raptures. A quite brilliant flick from Aaron Engels sent Hatate in behind, on the right this time, and his low cross was thumped into the roof of the net by Ida. But McGinn would ultimately have his say for Villa after the interval, and, while he didn't even get the assist as the host moved back in front, his famous rear end was more than played its part. As the Villa captain, and Engels chased a loose ball, McGinn swung his backside into the young Belgian and he was sent sprawling to the deck. He instantly played in Jacob Ramsey, who had Ollie Watkins up with him, and just Austin Trusty between him and the goal. He picked out his teammate, and Villa were back in front. If that was harsh and Celtic at that stage, what was to follow was incredibly so. Trusty looked to have clearly won the ball as he slid in on Watkins on the area, but French referee Clement Turpin pointed to the spot, and his call wasn't challenged by the VAR team. Justice was done though, in the end, as Watkins slipped in the act of shooting, hitting the ball off his standing foot and sending it wildly over the bar. Now though, Celtic really were hanging in. Schmeichel came up with a big save low to his left from Watkins, but Hatate managed a counter-punch, firing just wide at the other end. This was a big moment and some valuable experience for young Daniel Cummings as he replaced Ida, but he couldn't help Celtic conjure an equaliser. In fact, there wasn't another stark lesson for young Dane Murray, as the sub was caught napping by Watkins in stoppage time to set up Rodgers for his hat-trick. That was a little harsh on Celtic, who nevertheless emerged with much credit, the respect intact, and some further lessons that will no doubt need to be taken on board for the next stage. And in fairness, this was far from the Celtic at their strongest. Cameron Carter-Vickers was missing, and, having sold Kyogo Furuhashi to Rennes, and with Daisen Maeda serving the first game of his 2-match suspension, Yang Hyun-yoon filled in on the left of the attack. And for all that the South Korean contributed, Celtic would have been as well sticking Sharon Osbourne out there. It was a wild ride, alright, or a crazy train, as our old pal Ozzy might say, as this campaign has been to date for Celtic. On a night that threatened to go spectacularly off the rails though, Celtic managed to right their course and at least to avoid another hiding. And they had enough about them to suggest they're on track to at least make a first of a gargantuan task that Friday's draw will throw at them, with either Real Madrid or Bayern Munich lying in wait. And that article was written by Graham McGarry and read by Ian McKenna.
This article is from the Herald on Thursday the 30th of January 2025. It is found in the Voices section and the headline is "Child Protection Isn't Just a Matter for the Professionals," and the report is by Rebecca McQuillan. It is one of the most horrific cases ever to be aired in a Scottish court. The child sexual abuse carried out by 5 men and 2 women sentenced at Glasgow High Court this week is beyond comprehension. A girl, still young enough to be in nappies, raped. 2 older children subjected to savage beatings and sexual abuse. A child shut in a cupboard with a box of spiders, in an oven, locked in a fridge, a freezer. One of the other children raised the temperature on the freezer to try and stop her getting too cold. A poignant, humbling aspect of the case is the empathy of those terrorised children showed to each other in the depth of their suffering. The sentencing judge, Lord Beckett, paid tribute to the victim's bravery. Referring to one girl's witness statement, he said, "In stark contrast to what was inflicted on her and its impact, an impression of innate humanity shines through her words." Why they did not get help sooner? The children were added to Glasgow's Child Protection Register in July 2018, but it was nearly another 2 years before the living hell they inhabited came to light. One girl had the worst case of head lice one expert had seen in 30 years, with dark rings beneath her eyes. Another child was described as malnourished. They started going to a public building where they met a middle-aged man who tried to help them, and it was only after that that the extent of the abuse emerged. This case has prompted shock, revulsion, distress, anger, and shame. It is rare for abuse to be this extreme, it's important to say, but the questions that arise from it, how did it take so long to come to light, and how can we prevent it from ever happening again, are questions we have all too often asked before. We don't know what happened in this particular case. A case review is pending, but behind it all is a much more fundamental question that goes well beyond this case. Is the child protection model we have, after 40 years, still the best one to support marginalised children? If we were building from scratch, would we build the system we have? If the answer is no, then we must be prepared to change. Otherwise, we can't ever be confident of protecting other children from harm. Unfortunately, social workers and police can't always know what's happening behind closed doors. They are also operating under serious pressure. But professionals worry that different agencies working on child protection sometimes operate too much in silos and without enough integration, and this means opportunities to prevent abuse could be missed. One more successful model that some professionals point to is where family support services build strong relationships with families and, working in an integrated way with social work and other services, act upon early signs of problems to prevent a crisis. A typical scenario in which children might become vulnerable to abuse is where an abusive person preys on a woman with children and moves into their lives. Family support centres provide people with an outlet informally to discuss any fears they have with people they trust, rather than reporting straight to the police and triggering a hard-edged response. They might admit they don't feel in control of who is coming to the house and are worried that their children are at risk. Workers can then connect with social work or the police so that a developing crisis can be averted. How often does it really work like that? Cuts and short-term budget cycles have eroded early years support in some places. Any upsetting case turns the spotlight on the actions of professionals. But focusing attention on blaming and shaming professionals like social workers promotes defensiveness, not open, honest conversations about what needs to improve. An open, honest conversation would admit first the scale of the problem and ask whether the whole system needs to be redesigned with vulnerable children at its centre. It would take the politics and the bluster out of it. Child protection isn't just a matter for the professionals, of course. Members of the public too have a role to play. The Children First support line, which allows people to chat over their worries about a child by phone, text or online with skilled professionals, is one service that people can approach for advice. The fallout from this case will continue. Minister for Children, Young People and the Promise, Natalie Dawn Innes, has readily admitted that the children in this case were failed. How could she not? But we won't have the details of what happened until an independent case review has been carried out. It is supposed to have an independent reviewer from out with Glasgow, and that person has yet to be appointed. How independent will they be? Will the agencies involved feel able to be truly honest and explore what might have gone wrong? How long will it all take? Already, the children have experienced justice delayed. The crimes came to light nearly 5 years ago, but it took until last year for the case to come to court and until now for sentencing. In cases as serious as this, such delays are intolerable. How are children to start recovering when a case drags on for so long? There is also a shortage of skilled therapeutic support for children to recover from abuse. How much better if children could be saved from harm in the first place? The perpetrators in this nauseating case were found guilty of multiple offences, including rape and attempted murder, and collectively sentenced to 93 years in prison. They were handed rare orders for lifelong restriction, OLRs, meaning they will always be in prison or on parole and might never be released. They may no longer be a danger to society, but others will be. Protecting children is challenging and complex, but some who have devoted their lives to working with children believe we can do it better if we're willing to think radically. It's the least these children deserve. That report was by Rebecca McQuillan.
The Herald on the 31st of January and the Voices section. 60s legend who returned with a vengeance from heroin and homelessness by Neil Cooper. Marian Faithfull, born December 29, 1946, died January 30, 2025. Marian Faithfull, who has died aged 78, was a mercurial singer who transcended her status as a 1960s swinging London icon and weathered several personal storms to become an elder stateswoman of a very English kind of bohemianism. She became a pop face after scoring a hit with a jaunty rendition of As Tears Go By in 1964, composed by Mick Jagger and Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones, who would later put out their own version of the song. Faithfull released 5 albums between 1965 and 1967, living a high-profile lifestyle, exacerbated in part by her relationship with Jagger. As the peace and love hedonism of the 1960s gave way to something darker at the end of the decade, Faithfull dropped out of view. Following several years of homelessness and heroin addiction, she returned to music with a vengeance with Broken English in 1979. With Faithfull's by now far huskier voice already heard on her country album Dreamin' My Dreams in 1976, Broken English saw her showcase a set of songs that took her beyond her past musical life on an album driven by a moody modern pulse. While the title track was inspired by Ulrike Meinhof of German terrorist cell the Red Army faction, the stark cover of John Lennon's Working Class Hero reinvented the former Beatles' already scabrous lyrics as something even more pointed. A version of Shel Silverstein's The Ballad of Lucy Jordan, a song about suburban housewives' mental breakdown, and first recorded by Dr. Hook, was released as a single. While it only reached the fag end of the charts, Faithful's version later appeared on several film soundtracks, including Thelma and Louise in 1991. Broken English closed with the reggae-tinged invective of Why'd You'll Do It, a barbed and explicit response to a lover's betrayal penned by poet Heathcote Williams. The record's downbeat tone chimed with the times, marking the beginning of Faithful's creative rehabilitation. Later named by the MNE as one of the 500 greatest albums of all time, Broken English remains a totemic artistic statement. Faithful herself called it her masterpiece. In the 45 years that followed, Faithful released numerous albums, collaborated with a younger generation of artists, and re-recorded old songs with a lived-in vigour that breathed fresh life into them. She acted on stage and in films, recorded spoken word albums, and proved herself a captivating performer to the end. Marianne Evelyn Gabriel Faithful was born in Hampstead, London, to Robert Faithful and Eva von Sacher-Masoch. Her father was a British Army major, while her Budapest-born mother had aristocratic roots in the Habsburg dynasty. Her parents divorced when she was 6, and she and her mother moved to Reading, where she was given a bursary for St. Joseph's Roman Catholic Convent School. Faithful joined the local Progress Theatre student group and also spent time at the Braziers Park commune in Oxfordshire, in which her father was involved. Faithful had already been singing in coffee bars when she attended a Rolling Stones launch party with her then-boyfriend John Dunbar. Faithful was a key member of the Stones' inner circle and became tabloid fodder after being found wrapped in a fur rug during a police drugs raid on Richard's country estate. Her creative influences on the band included introducing Jagger to Mikhail Bulgakov's novel The Master and the Margarita, which partly inspired Beggar's Banquet-era masterpiece, Sympathy for the Devil, 1968, on which Faithful is one of the chorus singing the woo-woo backing vocals. Subsequent songs, You Can't Always Get What You Want, 1969, and Wild Horses, 1971, are said to have been inspired by her. But Faithful was no mere muse. She co-wrote Sister Morphine, 1969, originally credited only to Jagger and Richards, but which became one of her key songs. She re-recorded it during the Broken English sessions. As an actress on stage, Faithful played Irina in Chekhov's Three Sisters and Florence Nightingale in Edward Bond's play Early Morning, both at the Royal Court. On film, Faithful acted opposite Alan Dillon in The Girl on a Motorcycle, 1968, and played Ophelia in Tony Richardson's film of his production of Hamlet, 1969. On TV, she starred with Britt Ekland in a production of Strindberg's The Stronger, 1971. While living on the streets, she recorded material that eventually appeared on Rich Kid Blues, 1985, an appearance singing Ballad of the Soldier's Wife on the Hal Wilner produced it, Lost in the Stars. The music of Kurt Weill, 1985, saw a full collaboration on Strange Weather, 1987. Seven Deadly Sins, 1998, saw Faithful record Kurt Weill and Bertolt Brecht's seven-scene sung ballad, which she had previously performed in New York. The record contained other Brecht-Weill songs, including material from the Threepenny Opera, in which Faithful had played Pirate Jenny in Dublin. Other collaborations include Kissing Time 2002, which featured material co-written with the likes of Jarvis Cocker and Blur. Before the Poison 2005 saw her work with PJ Harvey and Nick Cave. She covered Dusty Springfield and the Shangri-Las alongside new material on Horses and High Heels. 2011 appeared with guitarist Bill Frisell at 2013's Yoko Ono curated Meltdown Festival and released a brand of new set of songs on Give My Love to London 2014. In 2018 she collaborated with Cave, fellow Bad Seed Warren Ellis, Ed Harcourt and Mark Lanigan on Negative Capability. By this time, Faithfull's significance as an artist had been confirmed in 2011 when she was awarded the Commandeur of the Ordre des Arts at Des Lettres in France. Faithfull wrote 3 memoirs, Faithfull, an autobiography, 1994, Memories, Dreams and Reflections, 2007, and Marian Faithfull, A Life on Record, 2014. These focused on much more than her musical career and 3 marriages to Dunbar, Vibrators guitarist Ben Brierley, with whom she had lived in a Chelsea squat, and Giorgio Della Terza. They also documented her health battles with cancer, hepatitis, and several injuries that prevented her from performing. In 2020, she was hospitalised after testing positive with COVID-19. On what turned out to be her final album, She Walks in Beauty 2021, Faithfull spoke the words of the Romantic Poets set to backings by Ellis, with Cave and Brian Eno also contributing. With much of the record recorded in lockdown, the result is the suitably poetic culmination of a body of work spanning more than half a century. As Faithfull matured into a torch-sung diva, Renaissance woman, an artistic force to be reckoned with, wisdom and experience were channeled into every note she sang. She is survived by her son, Nicholas Dunbar, to her first husband, John Dunbar. And that was by Neil Cooper. The Herald on the 31st of January and the Voices section. Herald Diary. Where are all the bears bearing with us? In the drink, winter is about self-inflicted deprivation, points out Paul Cortopassi from Bonnybridge, who informs us that his female relative is anxiously awaiting the end of dry January. For further clarification, Paul adds she's fed up only drinking dry martinis, dry sherry, London dry gin, and dry red wines, and wants her wet drinks back. Wicked Warbling. The diary recently discovered a sing-along version of The Wicker Man, the classic movie about paganistic revelries on a Scottish island, which builds to a fiery conclusion. Now we are deciding which songs should be showcased in it. John Mulholland suggests the painfully appropriate ditty Burn Baby Burn, performed by a band with an equally appropriate name, Ash. Money Matters. The spendthrift teenage daughter of reader Kirsty Irvin has a couple of part-time jobs, yet she still insists on pleading with her mum for a cash top-up to get her through the revelries of Friday and Saturday evening. This led Kirsty to quote an oft-repeated maxim to her daughter: "Money doesn't grow on trees, you know," harumphed the exasperated parent. Eyes wide with possibly fake surprise, Kirsty's daughters replied, "Really? So why do banks have branches?" Wipeout. The local boozer is the hallowed hall where all of the problems of the world are solved. Unfortunately, when the problem solvers wake the following morning and sober up, they usually discover to their chagrin that they have forgotten all the valuable wisdom accrued the prior evening. Thankfully, reader Keith Cochran has somehow managed to retain the info he gleaned in the pub, which he is willing to share with our lucky readers. Says Keith, after a few beers, one of my pals pointed out that self-driving cars are a terrible idea. An intrigued Keith asked why. So the pal explained, if we manage to build self-driving cars, there'll be no need for windscreen wipers, and all the highly skilled windscreen makers working in the windscreen factories will be on the scrap heap. That's too high a price to pay just to get a bunch of smarty pants cars on the roads. Couching his terms, the frustrated wife of reader Kenneth Anderson growled at him. When we first started dating, you assured me you were interesting. Splayed on the living room couch, Kenneth noted, Nope, I said I was into resting. Bear where? Confused Angela Martin gets in touch to point out people are often saying things like, bear with me. Yet they don't have a bear with them. Why such obvious lying? And that was by Lorne Jackson.
From the Herald Scotland, Saturday the 1st of February, from the comment section. Happy birthday, Glasgow. I love you, despite you know what. By Mark Smith. People sometimes accuse me of being negative about Glasgow when I talk about the state of the streets and the litter and the ruined buildings and all the rest of it. But you know what it's like. When you love someone or something, you can see the faults as well as the strengths because you're close up, and that's certainly true of Glasgow and me. So, Glasgow, I know you and I love you. I first fell for the place and dumped my first love Aberdeen when I moved to Glasgow in the 90s and got the best of it, I really did. Working in Park Circus, living on St Vincent Crescent, the Barras, the old toll bar. My best friend also said hello to me for the first time, and even though I am a bit sceptical about Glaswegians being friendlier or funnier than people from other cities, whatever the city had was working for me. And I think, looking back, that it was really the buildings, not the people, that worked first, the stones, not the skin. Aberdeen has always had the feel of a fishing town that got bigger, even after the oil and gas came. Glasgow, on the other hand, had the greatness that the Victorians built, and I was a sucker for it. My favourite part, then and now, is the grid around St Vincent Street, where men with fine symmetrical minds and cash from the Empire built up and up. Just the other day, I stopped to stare at one of my favourites, the North British and Mercantile Bank building on the corner of West Campbell Street. Glorious. And now we say, happy birthday, Glasgow. Happy 850th birthday to be precise, if we believe it. We're told the city is 850 years old because the city gained borough status in 1175. And it's a bit random if you ask me, but what the hell? I like a party. The council this week officially launched its plans to celebrate the occasion, and they're promising musical events along the Clyde, pop-up exhibitions from the People's Palace, free tasting events at Glasgow restaurants, and loads of other things too. So, some good stuff. But I can't help being a bit of a party pooper by pointing out that the reason the People's Palace will be doing pop-up exhibitions is because the original building and the glass house are closed for renovation after years of concern about how they were being cared for. The glass house in particular was in a terrible state of neglect latterly, and its closure in 2018 resulted in the death of many of the trees and plants inside, which was a sad sight. Perhaps it can recapture some of its former glory when it reopens in 2027. I hope so. In the meantime, I'm happy to join in the birthday celebrations, warts and all, strengths and faults, mainly strengths. You don't need me to point out, although I have many times, that Glasgow is losing lots of its buildings, by fire, by neglect, physical and political, and by deliberate action. And the council and the government still haven't worked out what the answer is. Hint, encourage people to move back from the suburban ghettos into the centre of the city. This is still a problem. It hasn't gone away. But even though I can see the rubble in the flames, we all can, I can see the signs of hope too. The development plans for Charing Cross, the new buildings on Argyle Street by the Tron, the new bridge and apartments at Govan, the offices on the south of the river. The signs are there. And whatever happens, we can still walk down the arteries, sometimes clogged and dirty, to the heart, the centre of the city around St Vincent Street. This metal and stone is the reason I fell in love with Glasgow, and I'm still in love with it now. As for the faults, I could finish with another complaint about the men and women who are running the city right now, but I'm reading a fine book at the moment, Art and Audacity by Tom Honeyman, the celebrated director of Kelvingrove Museum, who brought Dali's Christ of St John of the Cross to Glasgow, and what he says about the city in the 70s is worth repeating now, because it reminds us that Glasgow's problems aren't new, or the product only of the post-2014 hegemony. and that its strengths are at least 50 years old, possibly 850. I like living in Glasgow, writes Honeyman. I know it has squandered much of its great inheritance. It is, at present, badly governed, and is the worst publicised city in the kingdom. But in no other place have I found more love, more tolerance, more wit, more brilliance, more mediocrity, more encouragement, more frustration, more sympathy, more envy, more big men in small jobs, and more small men in big jobs. Whatever its present shortcomings as a city, Glasgow has always been hospitable. Many a stranger within its gates has put the virtue on record. 50 years on, still true. So I'm putting it on record. I love Glasgow, still. It is squandering much of its great inheritance. It is, at present, badly governed. It is still one of the worst publicised cities in the kingdom. And there are small men and women in the big jobs. But 30 years after moving here, the stranger within its gates isn't going anywhere. And even though I doubt it's a thing, I'll try to celebrate the 850th birthday in the proper positive spirit. And when I see the bulldozers and I have my doubts, I'll do what someone once said to me to do if you want to truly appreciate Glasgow. Look up. But I'll also look within what this handsome, strong, rambunctious place has done for me. It's made me happy. And that was a comment piece by Mark Smith.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 3rd of February 2025, from the Voices section. Shopkeepers have resilience, and they're going to need it. Article written by David Lonsdale. In the 5 years writing this column, it's never been difficult to find fresh issues or perspectives affecting Scotland's shopkeepers. We've seen the retail industry overcome COVID lockdowns and restrictions, change shopping habits due to home working, supply chain bottlenecks, and a cost crunch prompted by the conflict in Ukraine. Despite all this turbulence, it seems volatility will continue. Lately, retailers have had to contend with frigid conditions and weather alerts, including the latest battering from Storm Eowyn, deterring shoppers and impacting operations. For all that it's been an arduous half-decade, the one thing that retail and the brilliant people who work in it have in spades is resilience. They'll continue to need that as we seek to build a more dynamic and vibrant retail industry. 2024 wasn't a stellar year for Scottish retail, but on the plus side, the inflationary pressures of the previous couple of years were finally brought to heel, with shop prices ending the year in deflation. Scotland's retailers also saw a solid December in terms of festive retail sales. Yet the value of retail sales over 2024 as a whole nudged down 0.4%. This was also reflected in shopper footfall. Elevated household energy bills and mortgages are partly to blame. However, the Scottish Retail Consortium's surveys show Scots are also prioritising experiences such as holidays and concerts over buying products, perhaps a lingering reflection of COVID times when these activities were prohibited. Where stores have been busy, it has often been in response to discounting, another challenge for retailers trying to trade profitably on a sustainable basis. So what's in store for Scotland's retailers and shoppers in 2025? The early months of any new year are traditionally tough for the sector. Less revenue comes through tills as people rein in spending after the excesses of the festive period, yet outgoings for rent, rates and wages still need to be met. These outgoings will spike further as an array of additional statutory costs come into effect in April. The UK government's changes to employers' national insurance contributions will add £190 million to Scotland's retailers' tax bills, whilst the Scottish Government's rise in business rates will add a further £7.6 million. This cannot simply be absorbed and will have direct consequences for staffing, investment, store viability and prices charged to customers. Retailing has been a leading adopter of digital technology, and many brands pivoted online during COVID when stores were shuttered. Customers will likely see some changes in store as the rising cost of employment leads to fewer staff and a greater focus on automation. Self-service tills and order points, automated returns machines, and more electronic shelf-edge labels will feature across a broader range of stores. Consumer demand has the potential to be a major driver of the economy, especially with the growth in household incomes continuing to outpace overall inflation. However, consumer sentiment, a precursor to increased spending, remains becalmed. Instead, households are saving more, and our surveys show Scots think both the UK and Scottish budgets have done little to improve personal finances. This is before hikes in council tax and household water bills, and a likely return to rising prices on shop shelves as stores feel the full force of increased statutory costs. A more optimistic narrative and concerted effort from all of our governments to improve consumer sentiment and release the consumer spending spigot could prove a boon for growth. Domestic considerations won't be the only thing on the minds of retailers this year, as international developments will factor too, particularly for prices charged to consumers. We've yet to get a clear sense as to what the new US administration will do on tariffs and protectionism and the impact it may have on global trade. Positive news elsewhere could see a resumption of merchant shipping through the Suez Canal, shortening trade flows and reducing freight costs, which would be good news for consumers. 2025 is unlikely to be dull for Scotland's retailers. What is certain is that the winners and losers will be determined by who can manage costs, create the best value offerings for customers, and advance in a growth-challenged market. David Lonsdale is Director of the Scottish Retail Consortium. That article was read to you by Elizabeth.
From Herald Scotland, 31st of January 2025, from the STEM section of the business section. Major robotic-assisted surgery milestone for Scotland. Article by Craig Williams. More than 10,000 patients across Scotland have benefited from robotic-assisted surgery since 2021, new figures have revealed. It follows a major expansion of surgical systems designed to reduce rates of open surgery and enhance NHS productivity. The expansion saw the Scottish Government invest in 12 additional Da Vinci surgical systems since 2021, more than tripling the number of existing Da Vinci surgical systems in the country. It had the primary aim of improving access to RAS for gynecology and colorectal patients, the clinical specialities that had the highest rates of open surgery in Scotland. It also supported continued expansion in the already established programmes of urology, thoracic, and head and neck surgery. As a result, more patients in Scotland have been able to benefit from minimally invasive surgery. Robotic-assisted surgery is a form of minimally invasive surgery in which surgeons use robotic-assisted surgical systems to perform delicate and complex operations through a few small incisions, using instruments attached to the arms of the surgical system. Surgeons have total control of the system's movements. Professor Campbell Roxburgh, consultant colorectal surgeon, University of Glasgow, said, "Thanks to the Scottish Government's continued investment in this cutting-edge technology and its ongoing implementation across the nation, we are now realising what we set out to achieve through the expansion. We have vastly reduced rates of open surgery, and we have improved equity of access to robotic-assisted surgery and its associated outcomes for patients. To reach this significant national milestone is testament to that." Health Secretary Neil Gray said, "These surgical robots have transformed the experience of surgery for a number of patients across NHS Scotland as well as easing the pressure on surgeons with procedures that are less physically demanding to carry out. Crucially, by providing more opportunities for surgeons to carry out robotic-assisted procedures, we can attract a broader pool of surgeons to work here, helping us build a stronger NHS Scotland for the future. David Moranti, Vice President of Intuitive UK and Ireland, makers of the Da Vinci surgical system, said, "We'd like to congratulate all surgeons and care teams across the NHS in Scotland who have pioneered the use of our Da Vinci surgical systems to advance minimally invasive care and reach this incredible milestone of 10,000 patients treated since 2021. We remain committed to supporting NHS Scotland as it continues to expand access to minimally invasive Da Vinci surgery for patients, to reduce rates of open surgery while improving outcomes for patients and delivering sustainable productivity improvements." And that article was written by Craig Williams.
An excerpt from the Herald Arts newsletter by Barry Didcock, Senior Features Writer. A dirty word in praise of the much maligned essay. Long known for exposing venality, corruption and incompetence in government, public institutions and private companies, Private Eye also offers astute and insightful book reviews. The current edition turns its attention to Alive in the Merciful Country, the latest novel by Garland Scottish author A.L. Kennedy. It's a sort of psychological thriller which also functions as a State of the Nation address. It's a decent enough review, but note the last sentence. Once again, what with all the ruminating and the sly ironic tone, there lurks a suspicion that the novel is possibly not her, Kennedy's, natural medium, and what we really have here is an essayist manqué. Having had the pleasure of talking to Ms. Kennedy about Alive in the Merciful Country, a conversation which did regularly delve into subjects such as politics and nationalism, I half agree with the sentiment. She would make an excellent essayist, though not perhaps at the expense of novel writing. But here's the thing, who reads essays these days? The bestseller lists aren't exactly groaning with essay collections. In fact, if even an established author went to a publisher proposing such an undertaking, I suspect they'd be handed a bar of imperial leather and told to wash out their mouth. Essays are a dirty word, even in a world which publishes over 2 million books a year, the majority non-fiction. They smack too much of the schoolroom, of something that isn't fun and isn't good for you, even if the grown-ups say it is. That's not to say some essays don't sneak through. Although long-form journalism is a dying art, the essay does still exist at the intersection of memoir, feature, TED Talk and blog post. But creeping into print and book form, they have to disguise themselves as something else. Collections of edited newspaper columns or magazine articles, for example, or those prettily designed stocking fillers you may have encountered at the till of your local bookshop, pocketbook-sized tomes which sell for $5. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's We Should All Be Feminists is a good example. It is actually based on a 2012 TED Talk, but in print it's very definitely an essay. But maybe it's time for all those essayists manqué, the public intellectuals currently corralled in platforms such as Substack, to stand up and be counted, and for publishers to support and enable them. It makes sense on every level. The essay is a fantastic forum for thought, and the best essayists transcend their times and speak to those which follow. Hats off, then, to the Wigtown Book Festival, which this week launched the 2025 Anne Brown Essay Prize for Scotland, awarded annually since 2021 and named for the veteran BBC Scotland journalist, a former chair of the festival's trustees. In a world of hot takes and short attention spans, the essay provides a space in which writers can embrace nuance, says the festival's artistic director, Adrian Turpin. Never has it been more needed than it is today. Right then, I'm off for a cuppa. I can't promise to follow exactly the methods laid out by George Orwell in his celebrated 1946 essay A Nice Cup of Tea, but I agree with him on this point. All true tea lovers not only like their tea strong, but like it a little stronger with each year that passes. Art on a String. Manipulate Arts, Scotland's annual puppetry, animation and visual theatre festival, opens for business at venues across Edinburgh next week and features performances ranging from mime and circus theatre to dance and installation work. The 4-day programme runs from February the 12th to 15th and works as well as works in progress. There are also world premieres and screenings of short films. Among the highlights are The Law of Gravity and These Things Aren't Mine, both on at the Traverse Theatre, and international shorts, Queer Stories, screening at the French Institute. The first, a world premiere, is a collaboration between the Scottish Ensemble and award-winning puppetry company Blind Summit, who recently appeared at the Hollywood Bowl along with storied orchestra, the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Ahead of performances in Glasgow and Dundee, the show sees puppets dancing to live music in the form of Philip Glass's Symphony No. 3 and Verklärte Nacht by Aaron Schoenberg. These Things Aren't Mine, meanwhile, sees gymnast turned circus artist Gabby Cook explore post-traumatic stress disorder through the prism of a former child athlete, and among the short films in the Queer Stories strand, you find the tale of a soccer casual forced to hide his sexuality to fit in, a vibrant plea for trans rights, and a stop-motion work about a trans dinosaur coming out to their family. And finally, Celtic Connections has ended its run with the news that 2025 was a bumper year for the much-loved folk, roots and traditional music festival. Around 110,000 people attended the events, with 125 sold-out concerts over the course of 18 days, proof of our continued appetite for the kinds of entertainment where an audience faces a stage with humans standing on it doing stuff. Reflecting this, the Herald's critics have been out and about. At Glasgow Theatre Royal, Neil Cooper took in a touring adaptation of Paula Hawkins' psychological thriller The Girl in the Train, while, down the road at the King's Theatre, he watched the stage version of John Waters' riotous 1988 film, Hairspray. Finally, he was at the Usher Hall for Pretty Vacant, the story of punk and new wave, a fanzine-like cut-and-paste mashup that is part Xerox tribute act writ large, part history lesson, and part vindication for the blank generation whose vision changed pop culture forever. Still with music of a certain vintage, the Herald's Teddy Jameson was at Glasgow Barrowland to enjoy a performance by the Bluebells who, if nothing else, remain young at heart. As written by Barry Didcock and read by me, Ian. From the Herald Scotland, Tuesday the 4th of February, from the Voices section, Agenda, Striving to Keep the Public Safe from Rogue Electricians, by Mike Stark. To look forward and plan efficiently, it is often prudent to look back and consider how the voices of the past can inform and influence the direction of the future. This strategy would seem particularly prudent as Select currently celebrates its 125th year, empowering electricians and electrical businesses across Scotland. Although much has changed along the way, there is plenty we can learn from the past, as modern electricians still face many of the same issues raised by their forebears, not least a lack of skilled labour, late payments and, critically, unqualified and dangerous tradespeople. Our institution came into being when contractors in Glasgow, faced by the encroachment of untrained competition, formed the Electrical Contractors Association of Scotland in November 1900 and, in doing so, became the world's first body for the electrical sector. The association quickly flourished, attracting 250 member companies and expanding across Scotland. As separate branches were established in the following years. Annual subscription was 2 guineas, equivalent to £200 today. By 1917, it was facing for the first time an issue which is still at the forefront of our activities: the need for the registration of electrical businesses to ensure quality and the highest safety standards. As a Select timeline reveals, the Association's request for regulation was declined by the UK government, which said that winning the war was its main concern. Undeterred, it formed a propaganda committee in 1924 to make sure its voice was heard in the corridors of power, and continued to raise its profile throughout the 1930s, with activities such as discounting electric lamps for collieries and supplying the lighting for the 6-month Empire exhibition in Glasgow in 1938. In 1939, the association returned to Parliament to plead the issue of compulsory registration to keep the public safe from rogue operators. But, once again, its appeal was dismissed on the grounds of lack of parliamentary time. Broadening its horizons in 1963, the organisation joined the Association Internationale des Entreprises d'Equipement Électronique, AIE, now Europon, to share useful information and best practices with fellow electrical contractors across Europe. A critical element of this linkage was legal acknowledgement across the continent that the inherent dangers of unqualified individuals undertaking electrical work meant it could be undertaken only by qualified, registered individuals. This legal barrier to unqualified people performing complex and potentially dangerous electrical work applies also in many other parts of the world, but, so far, and despite sustained parliamentary lobbying efforts in Scotland over the past 5 years, not in the United Kingdom. More than 80 years after last lobbying the UK Parliament, a name change, and much economic and societal upheaval, the issue of regulation still shines as brightly as ever, and Select will continue to lead the campaign for the protection of title. Working along with a number of partner bodies, including the Scottish Joint Industry Board and United Union, we are seeking the introduction of protection of title for the profession of electrician, and we will not desist until we achieve that aim. Mike Stark is president of Select. Agenda is a column for outside contributors. Contact agenda@theherald.co.uk, and that article is read by Ian McKenna.
The Herald on the 4th of February and the news section. 90-year-old copy of the Herald found in a box hidden in church wall by Jodie Harrison. A 90-year-old copy of the Glasgow Herald has been uncovered among the contents of a mysterious time capsule discovered at an East Dunbartonshire church. The old newspaper was found among the rubble of New Kilpatrick Church's old hall in Bearsden after it was demolished last week to make way for a new block of flats. A rumour had circulated in the church for years that there was a box hidden inside a stone wall, but nobody could be sure it was true until it was found. The lead-covered box was opened during the service on Sunday, and inside was a copy of a Glasgow Herald, dated Saturday, 7 September 1934. Unlike the newspaper of today, it featured no headline stories on the front page. Instead, it showed that day's deaths and marriages, and 3 long columns of church notices for the next day, showing the significance of the church life for people alive then. The time capsule also included coins and a number of documents, including the edition of the Church of Scotland's magazine, Life and Work, from September 1934. The magazine was priced 2p and included an article that dated back 100 years ago, which means nearly 200 years of history is represented in the time capsule. It also included articles on the Order of Deaconesses, holidays for city mothers, and our Anglican Conference, showing that the same breadth of pastoral work, social care, and ecumenical partnership work was empowering the Church of Scotland then as now. A copy of the Milngavie and Bearsden Herald, the local weekly newspaper still in circulation today, was folded up in the box. New Kilpatrick Parish Church is one of the oldest active congregations in Scotland, and a special service was held last year to mark 375 years of being a parish. Its motto is Open Hearts, Open Minds, Open Faith, and Parish Minister Reverend Roddy Hamilton described the time capsule as a fascinating find. There were a number of coins found in the time capsule, all dated 1934 or as close to that date as possible. A crown, halfpenny, farthing, sixpence, etc., he explained. The children found these particularly interesting, given our greater use of cards and mobile phones to pay for things, especially the wait for the coins that would really tear a hole in your pocket. Smallest of all the documents was the order of service for the laying of the foundation of stone on 8 September 1934. The minister of the congregation in Paris at the time was Reverend James McCardle, whose daughter is a member of New Kilpatrick and was at the service on Sunday, holding the same order paper that he did all those years ago. Mr. Hamilton said a discussion on what to do with the contents has taken place. The developer, who now owns the site of the old building, has suggested they display some of the coins in the new vestibule, as well as use the date stone in the new construction, he added. The other documents may be buried again in a new, bigger capsule that will include newspapers and coins from today, along with some other ideas such as a letter, a mobile phone complete with instructions, photos, stories and suggestions from both children and adults about our life as a church today. We have a Heritage Month coming up in September of this year, and given that it is the month 91 years ago that the original time capsule was buried, we might do it all again. It will keep the story of the church going, so in 100 years' time another generation can see representations of more than 200 years of Christian heritage in this place. Wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall then? And that was by Jody Harrison. The Herald on the 4th of February and the Arts and Ents section. Scottish singer-songwriter Katie Tunstall on the strange sensation of turning 50 by Paul English. With 7 million records sold out gigs, and now 2 West End musicals on the go, Katie Tunstall remains fully focused on the joy of originality. Katie Tunstall has kept herself below the gaze of Eye of Sauron. It's the eye at the top of the tower in The Lord of the Rings. The Fife singer-songwriter explains to probably the only journalist on earth who has ever seen or read it, but who knows Sauron, and any comparison to his eye is a reference to oppressive power. I've always equated the Eye of Sauron with success within the music business. When you're doing well, then the eye swivels and looks at you. People become interested in you, what you're doing, how much money you're making. They all want to be involved. But if you stay just below the eye, then you can get on with what you're doing, making a good living, and do what you want to do. This year, as she embarks on a 6th decade, Katie Tunstall is definitely doing what she wants to do. By the end of the month, she'll have played 2 nights at Celtic Connections in celebration of her breakthrough album, Eye to the Telescope's 20th anniversary. By the time the daylight is stretching out a bit further, she'll have made her debut as a composer for musicals in London's West End. And just after we pass the halfway mark of the year, she'll have blown out the candles on her 50th birthday cake. After selling 7 million records, she most likely doesn't need to either. There's also the nagging difficulty that life doesn't have many nagging difficulties just now. She knows songs have always almost completely come from places of pain and struggle. Even Suddenly I See, the most positive song I've ever written, comes from a place of pain and struggle. I remember clearly remembering my booking agent saying we can step up to the arenas. I said no and regretted it many times over the years because it might have put me in a different place from the one I am in now. But ask me now and I'm really glad. It's a different line. I'm glad I said no because there's an aspect about the business and public side of things I don't enjoy. I feel very free where I am. Where she is, where she logs on to our interview Zoom, is at home on the foothills of Sangre de Cristo Mountains in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where she lives with her partner Chris and their dogs. As for where she's going next, she admits she has no idea. It's all the unknown at the moment, says the 49-year-old, who memorably crossed from the fringes of Fife's DIY folk scene and running an acoustic night in Edinburgh's Cowgate into the mainstream after a life-changing performance on the later with Jules Holland TV show in 2004. I've written a song called The Beauty of Uncertainty. I get claustrophobia at the idea of being locked into things. I don't want to know what I'm doing too far in the distance. I sometimes can't even look at the calendar. I don't want to do anything unless it genuinely, deeply excites me. I will never paint by numbers. I've never done it, although I've been tempted to do it at times, but I'm glad I never have. I will never start now. Nobody really wants to hear you write songs saying everything is great. I'm not going to start pretending I'm struggling because it has, to be honest, I'm starting to realize a lot of the songwriting came as a way of getting through and processing difficulties in my life. Turning 50 is punctuated by peace and happiness. It's a very strange sensation. I know myself, I know what I don't want. Perhaps there's the sense of having done what she set out to do. Last year, Turnstile was awarded an Ivor Novello Award for Outstanding Song Collection. It was, she says, a complete broadside. She had no idea she was even up for consideration. It's always lovely to get an award, and you'd be lying to say it wasn't. The Ivors are particularly special because it's a songwriter award, a craft award. Popularity plays a part, but it's not the most important factor. Hence me getting this award despite never reaching the heights of my first album again. The Edinburgh-born musician will bring the curtain up on her debut as a theatre composer when the London West End adaptation of the hit 90s teen movie Clueless opens in a fortnight. It's one of two she's been working on. The other a forthcoming stage take of the Craig Ferguson and Brenda Blethyn movie Saving Grace, for which she's writing lyrics, not just tunes. It's tough doing the songs for musicals, she says. Everything rhymes and you're getting all this narrative into rhyming melody. Then the director says, pull out those 4 bars. And you've got to change everything. It's like Jenga, but you start to become more elastic about changing things. I think it was Neil Young who said you should always honour what comes out your brain first, because that's your creative subconscious, and you don't mess with that. That has served me very well over the years. I didn't have a clue what Black Horse and the Charity was all about at the time, but I did realise many years later what it was about, not wanting to sign to the record label I was going to sign to. These projects are taking up all my creative juice at the moment, and if I wasn't doing them, maybe my own stuff would be brewing. But it's good to have a break from that sort of thing. If the Eye of Sauron is looking over the south side of Glasgow this June, it'll catch a glimpse of KT Turnstile marking her 50th birthday at a party with Simple Minds and fellow support act Hamish Hawke and tens of thousands of pals at Bellahouston Park. She said I was having a wobble in 2017, and at that time Jim Kerr and Charlie Birchall gave me such good advice and support about what I was doing and how I was doing it. They're very generous guys and I love them both to bits. It's amazing seeing them getting back to the absolute heights with their career, and such a big deal to join them for that show. I can't wait. KT Turnstile plays Bellahouston Park on June 27. Clueless opens at London's Trafalgar Theatre on February 15. And that was by Poor English.
That concludes this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Q and Review and to tell your friends about our service.